witness on the way. They're trying to see if that nigga gonna come. I don't know who this witness is supposed to be. Is this Justin? Child, if it's supposed to be Justin, then give it the fuck up. But I don't know who this witness is supposed to be. But anyway, we come back to Kathy. Kathy want to talk to Stogner. So she said before lunch, there was a question about probation. They said, didn't he have a criminal case in Broward? And they was like, yeah, but it was under diversion, you know? So they said they did an objection, and they was like, okay, I'm done. So then defense came up. He said, when you write a report, you were being truthful, right? Everything you turned in, you told the truth? He said, yeah. They said, and you did the follow-ups? He said, yeah. They said, when Sean Kelly answered your questions, you felt like he was telling the truth. He said, yeah. They said, did you have any more questions that you needed to ask Sean Kelly? He said, no. They said, so when he said that they fought and that the muzzle went off near Kelsey, you felt like that was true and you didn't need to ask any more questions. He said, yeah. They said, don't all police reports summarize, what happened? He said, yeah. They said, did he ever mention my client? They said he never mentioned my client, and then he answered yes. They said you spoke to Megan in July in 2021 with the attorney and Desiree, right? They said, did they answer all the questions? He said, yeah. They said you asked her relevant questions in 2020, and she never mentioned a bribe, correct? He said, correct. They said, didn't she tell you that she didn't want to falsely accuse anybody? He said, yes. They said, did you ever look at Megan's Instagram? That fucking detective said no. They said, at any point, did you look at her page? He said no. He said, wouldn't it be important if she had said something different on social media than what she told y'all? He said yes. So why didn't you look at it? More incompetence. They said in this case, you later looked at her post. They said, did you see a post? Wait, let me pause. In this case, you later looked at her post, right? He said, yeah. They said, did you see the post where she said her back was turned as she was walking away and she got shot? He said, no. Now, this is the first fucking post that this is one of the first posts that she makes. How the hell you didn't see that? This is when she showed her foot. So this was a pivotal post. She did the whole goddamn dissertation about it. So anyway, he showed him the Instagram post. He said, have you seen this? He said, no. They said, at any point, did you look through her damn post? He said, no. He said, I was asked to author a search warrant for Mrs. Pete's Instagram, but I didn't look at it. He just issued the paperwork. They said, do you have any evidence that my client was on probation from 2018 to 2020? He said, no. He said, is there any info on probation? He said, no. And now we got the recross. He was done. On recross, they said the interview from 2020 to 2021, which one was longer and more detailed? He said the one from 2021. They said, you are aware of the 2017 diversion, right? He said, look, I don't have no clue about how they do shit in Florida. I'm in California. I saw it, but, it's different than probation. And so they said, okay, we done with you. So then they brought up a rebuttal witness. They then brought up the DNA nigga again. Not the one that the DA had, the one that the prosecution had. His name is Randy Zepeda. So they brought him back up. He outlined that he was a criminalist, and he specialized in DNA. They said, let's talk about the transfer of DNA. Very briefly, you guys, transfer of DNA. I have DNA on my hands. I shake academics' hands. My DNA is now in his hands. Academics could pick up his bottle, and my DNA can be found on that bottle simply because I shook his hand. That is a transfer of DNA, simply put. So, can you remove DNA with napkins? He said, yes, some. They said if somebody washed their hands before touching a gun, is it less likely for them to have DNA on the gun? He said, yes, less likely. They said, what about after getting in a pool? Would there be as much DNA on your hands then? He said there would be less DNA. The chlorine in the swimming pool will get some of the stuff off your hands just like washing your hands will. He said if a person picked up a gun and shot 5 times, do you feel like DNA will be on that gun? Is that something you agree with? He said yes and no. He said it's possible. It's highly possible, but that's nothing that I could definitively say. They said the DNA, it was inconclusive on the gun. So that doesn't mean that he didn't fire the gun. It just means that we can't prove he did. They said, what about him and the exclusion? He said, I can't say that he was excluded or included in it because we could not match it. They said in terms of the female DNA, the other expert said that a female had to be included on the test. He said, I don't agree that a female can be included, but I don't know. He said at least one contributor was male, and there was a 90% contribution from that male. Now, before anybody in these comments gets excited because they feel like, oh, that must mean a nigga shot that gun. 90% DNA on that gun does not mean that that was the last person that fired that gun. That just means that the DNA of that person is on there more so than the other ones. So somebody could have 2% DNA on the gun, and they could have been the last one to touch it versus somebody that had 90. So at first, before defense was able to break it down, I think a lot of people was like, ooh, but then you get the science behind it, and it's not all it cracked up to be. So anyway, they start asking about accreditation, and they're talking about the fact that the LAPD has accredited places to do this testing of DNA, and that the people that they use, the defense, they're not accredited. So they talked about what it meant to be accredited, and then he said it's being accredited important to the LAPD, and he said yeah, and he said basically an accreditation means that someone comes in and they're unbiased and they check to make sure that everything is running properly. They said, do y'all have access to other things that, non-accredited places have? He said, yeah. And then he explained that equipment. Then he said, every year we get audited. Oh, so they're done with that. All right. The defense comes back. They said, did I hear you correct that you graduated from Cal State? He said, yeah. They said, did you know that the expert taught at Cal State? He said, no. They said, did you know him? He said, no. They said, okay, you agreed that the court calls panel. And he said, yeah. They said, do you have any reason to believe that they're doing bad business or that they're not transparent? He said, no. He said, well, let's talk about transfer of DNA. They said, Touch said, yes. He said, if the gun was wiped, there would be no DNA on it, right? He said, right. He said, so with multiple DNA findings, do you have any evidence that the gun was wiped clean? He said, no, I don't have any evidence that the gun was wiped clean. They said, do you know how long my client was in a pool, if in a pool at all? He said, no. He said, do you have any evidence of my client's DNA on the gun? He said, no, not based on the DNA. He said there were 4 contributors, correct? Major and minor contributors. He said, yes. One person contributed 90%, another 5, another 3, another 2. He said, does 90% mean that they touched that weapon last? He said, no. He said, from the 5, the 3, and the 2%, can you tell if they're male or female? And he moved on to something else. He said, if you had Kelsey's DNA, would you have been able to tell if her DNA was on that weapon? He said, yes. They said, would you have been able to tell if it could have been a female? And he said, yeah. They said, on the magazine, was there any evidence that TORY touched it? He said there was no evidence that he touched it. And they gave us the breakdown of that with the percentages. They said, you can't tell us if Kelsey is included due to a lack of her DNA, right? He said, right. They said the fact that you don't have the DNA from Kelsey is why you can't tell us if Kelsey was included, right? He said, correct. He said, if I shot 5 times and I put the gun in the car, will my DNA be on that gun? He said, yes. They said, do you have any evidence of DNA from TORY being on the gun? He said, no. So they go to recross. Here go Kim Barbie with this damn hypothetical pool bullshit talking about, well, if he argues that there's no DNA, is that false? He said, yeah, that's false because of the fact that I can't exclude him. So, it was inconclusive. Why the fuck you doing ring around the rosy? They said, do you know if my client got in the pool, or any facts of this fucking case? He said, no, I don't know no facts of this case. They said, so you can't say that my client's DNA was on the gun. He said, no. They adjourned the motherfucking court, dismissed his ass, and that's when they start talking about the exhibits. They went over all the evidence to see what they would present to the jury. They said that there may be a witness that comes in tomorrow, but they want the prosecution to do their closing statements, and he wants the defense to do their closing statements, and so that the people can go to the back and decide to let this man go the fuck home. He told everybody to be there earlier. We usually going in at like 10:30. He said 10 o'clock. 9:50 for the rest of y'all. Come on. They want them to like outline a couple of more things and come back in and present that to him to see if we can get some statements of fact before we go on. But he's ready to go ahead and get the information and tell the jury what they need to know so that they can take their ass in the back. He ready to